Hello all, welcome to the show. I'm Gus Gagliardi and this is Firecode Tech. On Firecode Tech, we interview fire protection professionals from all different careers and backgrounds in order to provide insight and a resource for those in the field. My goal is to help you become a more informed fire protection professional. Firecode Tech has interviews with engineers and researchers, fire marshals, and insurance professionals, and highlights topics like codes and standards, engineering systems, professional development, and trending topics in the industry. So if you're someone who wants to know more about fire protection or the fascinating stories of those who are in the field, you're in the right place. Hello all, welcome to episode 31 of Firecode Tech. On this episode we have John Zalepka. In episode 31 of Firecode Tech, we are talking about everything passive fire protection. John is the host of the new The Burn podcast from STI, and we get into the reasons why he's got into this podcast game. Tune into this episode of Firecode Tech because we talk about some absolutely fabulous tips and tricks for professional development, how to grow as a professional, and how to market yourself as somebody in the workforce. If you love fire protection, professional development, and how to get ahead in fire and life safety, you're going to love this episode. If you want to hear more about John, check out the show notes. You can check out a link to the Burn podcast and a lot of the other great links that we talk about in the show. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode of Fire Code Tech, and follow us on social media. LinkedIn's probably the platform where we post the most consistently. Also, if you could do me a huge favor and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, that helps out our analytics and helps us stay in your feed. Let's get into the show. Well, welcome to the podcast, John. Thanks so much for coming on.
Appreciate the time, Gus. Thanks for having me.
Well, awesome. Well, I love to get started with a little bit about your background and how you kind of found your way into the industry, more specifically, kind of fire stopping and passive fire protection. Would you tell me a little bit about that, John?
Sure. Well, how does anyone really find themselves in their career, really? It wasn't like I
Yeah,
was running around the neighborhood saying, hey, I can't wait for the passive fire protection industry to be born so I can have a career goal. It's interesting to think about, but as a whole, fire stopping is relatively new to the construction industry, and it's still somewhat in its infancy, if you ask me, really. So
sure.
I guess in a way, my career kind of parallels that. I started my first business when I was in college, and I eventually sold off most of the intellectual property to Target Corporation in 2007. And after a semi-retirement for a summer to get my golf game in line, I started working as a marketing consultant to stay busy. And then in 2013, a very dear friend of mine, David Jello, who's the Northeast regional manager at STI now, he and I were sitting around just kind of talking business. And I was a few years removed from the sale of my business. And like I said, I'd been doing some consulting work until that time. And then I was ready, I guess, to get a real job. So I thought I was going to go and work for a big agency. I'd always been in the branding and marketing and advertising world. So I was going to be calling on some of the largest brands in the world in New York City. And Dave was like, hey, I didn't know you were looking for a job. And I kind of said I really wasn't. And he said, give me your resume. 7+ years later, here I am.
Wow. Yeah, that's so funny. I love your point about like, oh, how does anyone find a career? And, I have sisters-in-law that are in high school and early college, and I remember what I was like kind of in college or getting out of college, and most people are just kind of stumbling through it, so I resonate with that. That's pretty funny. And also, yeah, I mean, what a great industry to fall into, and with so much promise. So that's cool. I love hearing about that.
So,
So yeah, mostly you've been at the company you're with now at STI. Would you
yeah,
tell the listeners about kind of what that company is for those who don't know?
sure. Well, STI stands for Specified Technologies Inc. For anyone that doesn't know, we're a industry leader in developing innovative fire protective systems, essentially that stop the spread of fire, smoke, and hot gases. Right. So we talk about passive fire protection. So for over 30 years, since 1990, we started, and we kind of work hand in hand with the construction industry, and we try to simplify the solutions because sometimes it can get kind of messy out there with fire stopping problems. We see them all the time. I started as a territory manager here back in 2013, just working with contractors essentially, teaching them how to install proper fire stop systems. I mean, the funniest story was when I first started, I had some great teachers. I mentioned David Jello, but Mark Nunn, who has since passed away, but he was a former contractor who came to work at STI the same time as I did. And the first day out in the field, he brought me a hard hat and a vest, and it was brand new. And he kind of took a look at me and said, "No, it doesn't look right." And he started kicking my hard hat down the street and threw my vest in some mud. And he threw me in a stairwell with a drywall contractor to kind of spend some time with the folks that actually install our products. And I couldn't believe that a single trade didn't install fire stopping. I mean, can you imagine if every time you ran a sprinkler pipe through a wall that the drywall contractor was responsible to make sure that it worked? It was kind of like, it was very eye opening right in the beginning, but fascinating at the same time to learn how the different trades use our products.
Wow, that's a great story. Yeah, I've always heard the new people on the construction site talking about kicking their hard hat around in the mud so that you don't look so shiny on your first
That's
day.
it. He took a look at me. He was like, "No, that's not going to work." So that's exactly what we
You
did.
got a target on your back, John. We got to
That,
fix that.
that's
No,
right.
that's great. Yeah, that's a great point on how it's not just one trade looking at fire stop. Um, but should probably is kind of out of sequence in how I thought it would go. But in where I work now, we love to see if we can one dedicated person doing the fire stop. But it seems like most of the time it is um, like each trade kind of doing it, but we try to write our specs to where there's one contractor kind of doing the fire stop. Would you do you have any thoughts on that, or like how often you're seeing that in the industry, or if you're still kind of in a capacity to speak on that? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we always recommend that, and oftentimes architects and engineers will write it into the specification that one trade is responsible for all of the fire stopping. Whether that's actually enforced by the time it gets to the job site, that remains to be seen. And that is contingent a lot upon the general contractor, the local authority having jurisdiction, the ownership. A lot of people have a say or don't have a say in who's going to do the fire stopping. And sometimes when it falls down to the trades, hopefully they're qualified enough to do that. And that's why we spend a lot of time training the different subcontractors and trade specific applications so that, if and when it does fall down to them, they're prepared to be able to pick up the pieces. But, there are specialty fire stop contractors. The FCIA is out there, so they have a great list of folks who are prepared to do all of the different types of applications. So sometimes we'll see midway through a project the general contractor say, "Okay, that's enough. I've seen enough. So let's get someone in here that knows all of the systems and can kind of clean it up." So but up front, if you can pre-construction meetings, if the subs are going to do it, if you can get everyone coordinated, there shouldn't be a problem. But if you can have a specialty contractor do it, that's always recommended.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like the bigger projects always have it, but some of the smaller guys, it's a little bit more of at the discretion of the individual contractor. But interesting, yeah, I like talking about that. And I don't know. I'd like to dive into to passive fire protection more and stick on this point a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a code nerd, so my head always goes to like, how do we know when we need passive fire protection? Or you guys also deal with like smoke tight penetrations as well, or that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's right. So essentially, when do you need it is anytime an opening is created in a wall or floor for fire stopping, a rated wall or floor. And then the same deal when you have your smoke partitions there, you're going to need to put some type of smoke and an acoustical sealant in there to stop the spread of smoke through those walls as well. So essentially, anytime a hole or an opening is created, so if you're talking about a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, sprinkler contract, they're all knocking holes in there to run their service lines that make a building inhabitable. You have contractors that create joints, drywall contractors, masons that make control joints. That you have two rated assemblies that come together that need to be fire stopped with a material that is elastomeric that can kind of move with the joint because that's what it's intended to do to begin with. And then you have your edge of slab. You see these beautiful high-rise buildings with a lot of glass on the outside, and they're basically hanging off of the building. They're curtain walls, so there's gaps around the edge of the building that need to be dealt with as well. So essentially, anytime there's a gap or an opening in a rated assembly, you have to have some type of a tested and listed system to be able to get that rating back.
Yeah, I like that. Thanks for that exposition, John.
Sure.
I kind of like have found myself in this space where the reason why I got into this kind of podcast game is because that I was kind of interested in like this teaching part of it because I'm, very early on in the industry and still trying to figure out, how when is this required? How do we know if we need this? So I like to belabor the point, even though probably anybody who's listening to a fire protection podcast might already know this. But yeah, I love that you were talking about edge of slab assemblies, and that's a term that I hadn't heard. We're working on a high rise project right now, and we were working with Hilti this week. My architect was like, do we need a
Ouch.
listed assembly here? Oh, is that a bad word? Did I just
Yeah, that,
say
that
a four
that's
letter word?
that's the H word. That's the H word. No, no, they're one of our major competitors, along with 3M and STI. I mean, we're basically the only three full line fire stop manufacturers. STI is the only manufacturer that's 100% committed to fire stopping. We don't really have a plan B, so we put all our R&D into getting tested and listed systems. But yes, to answer your question, you need some type of a system around the edge of the slab to make sure that you extend the fire rating of the floor through that non-rated curtain wall. I mean, if you think about curtain walls, right, they're made up of things that burn. Aluminum, glass is going to shatter. So these are not rated assemblies, but the floor is. So that floor has to continue out to that non-rated curtain wall.
Yeah, and so somebody was talking to me about this edge of slab interface, if you will, and they were saying, "Oh, this kind of like gap is where in near the EFIS was kind of how the Grenfell business happened." I don't know if you were aware of that, the Grenfell Tower fires and kind of any of the proceedings around that, but I don't know if you had any thoughts or knowledge about that.
Yeah, I mean, usually catastrophes make people's eyes open, and codes and standards throughout the world start to change and adjust to the different connections of curtain walls and how you're going to deal with those connections and those gaps that are created. So I don't know too much about the specifics of it, but I do know that every time something like this happens, different codes and standards are updated. At STI, I know that we have a strategic initiative team that deals with curtain walls that actually works with not only the engineers and the architects, but also the manufacturers to make sure that when the panels are made in the factories, that things such as fire protection are considered early on, so that by the time they get out in the field, you don't have to put extra support there to make sure that the fire stop system stays in place. But a lot of upfront planning can make sure that the building is not only safe but save you probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in installation of those panels and the proper systems once they get on site.
Yeah, I mean that's something great to talk about here is, if you don't plan for some of these systems in your construction and you find out you need an edge of slab you have an edge of slab condition and you need a rated system there, it's going to be a huge deal. I mean, the architect I was talking to was, having to re-coordinate with structural and, kind of incorporate these details for the rated assembly in their wall section, and it's no small task to incorporate one of these systems if you have a situation in which you need one and you didn't provide it. So I think that's a great point on how it can save you money by understanding these requirements and putting them into place when they are present.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are things that manufacturers can do to help contractors and installers in the field once things happen, and they're called engineering judgments. They're not the preferred way to do things, especially when it comes to those edge of slab conditions, and especially when you consider the fact that certain building codes don't allow for engineering judgments in certain jurisdictions. So there are, a lot of upfront planning can save you a lot of headache downstream for sure.
That's great. That's great. So, yeah. So, what are some of these like assemblies or the products for these assemblies look like for somebody who's a little bit more of a layman? Like, there's a wide variety, but yeah, I'd love it if you would touch on a couple of the different ways that you could do this.
Well, I guess you could break it down to through penetrations and joints. So essentially, anything going through a wall, like I said, your mechanical, your plumbing trades, your electrical trades, uh, you need usually some type of an intumescent sealant. This is something that's going to expand with heat when the fire hits it. It's going to fill any voids that are left after the fire starts to attack either the plastic jacketing on cable or even the drywall itself. When it starts to deteriorate, these intumescent products will expand, and they're basically they're passive again, and they're void fillers once they start to activate. And then you have your joints, which again, the edge of slab, that curtain wall is going to move from wind sway or whatever else. You're going to have your different joints, your head of wall or your wall to wall. These control joints are going to move with load or just movement itself in the basement into masonry walls. So you need something more of an elastomeric. So we have sprays and caulks or sealants to deal with those joints. So that's going to allow movement as that happens. So in basic terms, when you're going through penetrations, you're looking for elastomeric, and when you're dealing with your joints, you're looking for something that's intumescent for your through penetrations, and then for your joints, you want something that's elastomeric.
Awesome. Yeah. I think it's kind of wild because there's so many different ways. I've seen those like pillow looking things as well for like
Mm-hmm.
those big penetrations or big kind of void fillers. But yeah, it's kind of wild. The I think most people probably think of the cock or whatever, the fire cock, or that's kind of can be a nonsense term at times. It's
Yeah.
used so flippantly, but
Yeah, so normally our product section in our training program takes about 4 hours. So if you have some time, we could kind of go into all the different
yeah,
products. But
no,
no,
yeah,
there are plenty of products for different applications. But in its simplest form, through penetrations, intumescent joints, elastomeric kind of.
cool, yeah,
Yep,
and so uh, I think we touched on it briefly, but yeah, what you said that you were one of the roles you held initially was to help with these solutions, but yeah, would you kind of like speak a little bit about the roles you held and kind of your position now at STI?
sure. Again, like I said, I started in 2013 as a territory manager, so I was out in the field, working with all of the different trades, the subcontractors, the general contractors, doing lunch and learns at architects, um, working with ownership to, see what they care about. So, I ran that whole gamut just to, you know, get accustomed to who does what in this project because there are there's so many different people that have responsibilities for fire stopping on a project. So once I started to piece it all together, I started to mess with a lot of the presentations that we were making, and I eventually got asked to become the training and development manager. So what that has become is an expansion of our accredited training. So we had maybe a handful of AIA, which is the American Institute of Architects. They have their accredited training programs, and we had a handful of them. Now we have 20. So uh, over the pandemic, we really shifted our focus to having webinars, and I've been able to work with a lot of great thought leaders, not only within our company but within the industry to create about 30 different webinars. We've trained over 10,000 people, and we have everything from your most basic Firestop 101 to some of that, like you said, you love the codes and standards. We even had a webinar recently on codes and standards. So We have a lot of great trainings now that we've been able to develop, and that's my current role now as a training and development
Cool. Yeah, I've been seeing those badges online. I wanted to ask
manager.
you about that at some point. It seems like a fabulous idea to give somebody not just a way to learn more, but a way to brandish their knowledge and their certs, if you will. I think that's excellent. Yeah, would you speak about those fancy badges I've been seeing on LinkedIn?
Yeah, nah, I appreciate you bringing that up actually, and happy that you did. We partnered with a company called Credly, and it's a digital credentialing company. Essentially, it's basically taking the old school certificate and making it a digital version. I mean, technology's pretty much changed everything from the way we shop and cook to manage our health, and to the way we learn. Right, we're doing a lot more online modules for training and things like that. So it's this digital badging is going to change the way that we can showcase our skills and our experience in fire stopping, or a lot of some big brands are out there doing this digital badging as well. So essentially what it is it creates some metadata. So we put all of the different keywords for the trainings, and then they link that over to some context and some verification of those courses. So it's a great way to provide not only what you learned, but actually to verify it with the trainer, which is us, to put that online so that it's almost like an online resume. And there's even different ways that people are using it to network and manage their own professional development. So uh, we've essentially enhanced our earners benefits with these digital badges. So appreciate you bringing that up, though. So they're out there. You're seeing them. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. No, I think that's great. I'm a huge promoter of professional development and just kind of always looking for a way to make yourself more competitive in the industry. So, love talking about professional certifications and qualifications. So, yeah, I think it's so smart because people see those and they're like, man, that looks cool. I'd like to post too about, something that I've done good. People don't get that opportunity as often as you might think. And so I've seen like ICC does some the similar badges as well, and I think people really enjoy that way to like give them a chance to post about something good they're doing. So I think it's a smart deal.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that again. And it works both ways, right? I mean, it helps us from a branding point of view. People see STI out there, and it also lets the earners know, or their networks know, that there is this fire stop training. And we have so many courses now. As I mentioned, we did all of these webinars and we recorded them, so they are available, to listen back on our Fire Stop University on our website. I'll plug that right now: www.stifirestop.com. And our training page is great, so you can see all of the different courses on there that we have available, and they're all free essentially. We only charge for our premium course, which is a 2 day, usually in our corporate headquarters at Somerville, New Jersey, but we've been doing it as a virtual model. It's called Fit Level 2. It's a small nominal fee. It basically covers the cost of the training materials and things like that. So we have a train the trainer program with that as well. So teaching others how to teach is something that I'm pretty passionate about as well. And it's just a great time to be part of this industry.
Yeah, I think it's such a good time to be a part of the industry, fire and life safety in general, and because there's so much opportunity, and it sounds like you guys have been really taking a hold of this um, digital e-learning tidal wave that's coming down the pipeline. So I think it's awesome. I think that's all good stuff, and I'll be sure to throw some links down in the show notes for people in case they didn't catch that link for where they can find some more information about those courses if they're so inclined. But that's awesome. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this new podcast you got going, The Burn with STI. Would you mind telling me a little bit about how you got started and what you're doing?
I guess it's probably like the career path, right? You never know how these things are going to start, but
Hmm.
it's been great fun. I like trying to figure things out. So this has been interesting, but thankfully I haven't had to figure everything out. We have a great team that's working behind the scenes: Jason, Tanisha, Christina, Matt. We even have a guy, Scott Seidenberg, that works outside of the companies with a company called Scott's On Air. So he's been producing a lot of the show, managing the RSS feeds and all of that stuff. So I haven't had to figure that out. So it's really allowed me to kind of concentrate on, guest prep and also my day job at the end of the day.
Sure, that's awesome. Yeah, it's a lot to figure out. So that's awesome that you have a team around you kind of helping this.
For
So
sure.
so basically the podcast is just about like your perspective, or what are some of the topics that you like to get into with on the show?
Yeah, so it's essentially it's built around life safety and code compliance in the built environment. So we call it the burn beyond fire stop. So some of the goals for the show essentially are maybe getting beyond fire stop. I really want to be able to provide some insight and become a resource in the life safety space. And you know, so we've been talking to codes and standards people. We've been talking to, well, I guess I'll just name them, right? So we had Drew. He's been great. He was with Inspect Point, which is a fire and life safety inspection business. He's also the executive director for the New York Fire Sprinklers Contractors Association, and he's also a podcast host, the Fire Protection podcast. Lainey, who's at Lubrizol, she's in the marketing department there, and she drives innovative strategy for Blaze Master and Freeze Master, which is an antifreeze. We had Sean DeCrane. He was with a fire. He was a firefighter for the Cleveland Division of Fire for many years, and now he works at UL Underwriters Laboratories in the Building Life Safety, Security, and Technologies Division. And it's just been great getting to know these people. Oh, and my first guest, how could I forget Ruben? Ruben is with one of our divisions, STI Marine. He actually does a little thing on LinkedIn every Friday. So you got to check that out. He's awesome, Ruben Wansick. So it's just been great getting to know the guests. In the prep, I go on the LinkedIn profiles, so I get to learn a little bit about them, and then I get to dive a little bit deeper in there and try to get even beyond whatever it is in their industry. So again, we call it beyond fire stop. So even if it's a fire stop person, which our next two guests, Bill McHugh, he's the executive director for FCIA, and Pat Tichet, he's with Global Fire Protection Group. These people are both in the fire stop game. So we try to take the podcast at least beyond fire stop for the guests there. But, I guess goals for the show, I'd like to get a little bit more beyond the fire stop. And again, life safety and code compliance. I think that's a large area, and even, things that I'm not considering right now. So it's kind of where we're headed.
Gotcha. Yeah, very interesting. So, how did you guys think about, that you wanted to produce a podcast as a company? I know it seems like the people who always understand that it's a good idea are always the marketing professionals I see across the board. If you look at or big companies like NFPA and SFPE, it seems like the people at the helm of a lot of podcasts are people who understand this kind of environment and try to tap into it. Yeah, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience with getting it started and kind of like the impetus for it, or some more background.
Sure. I mean, it's, they say when's the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago? When's the next time today? I think they say the same thing with the podcast, right? When's the best time to start it 5 years ago? When's the next best time today? So I think looking at it in that it's just another medium, it's just another place to put your brand was kind of the impetus to think about, hey, how do we do this? And then when you take a look at it and you realize, hey, everyone's got a blog. I don't even know what the numbers are, 100 million blogs, and there's only like 2 million podcasts. So you can kind of stand out in your space, even if you're just standing out in your space, right? So just being there sometimes is, it'll develop. So, I mean, I talk about goals for the show. They were pretty broad. I don't know if you break that down later, you're going to realize that it's not really. So I don't know exactly where it's going to go. It's interesting. It's fluid. I tell people. So it's just kind of fun doing it and being there. And I think, like you said, from a marketing standpoint, I'm in the marketing department now. So I think maybe I said it one day, or maybe someone else said it, and it was just like, oh yeah, that'd be a great idea. Who's going to host it? And they're like, oh, John will do it. So that's kind of just where it came from. And I'm involved with Toastmasters, so I practice public speaking. So I guess that's why the fingers kind of got pointed at me, like, oh, he'll do it. So and
There you
I'll do
go.
it. I'm like Mikey back in the day. I'll eat anything.
That's good. Yeah, I think it's okay to, be fluid in your, kind of what your goals are or what you're looking to do for it. My brother has a podcast, and so I talk with him all the time about, kind of refining what you're trying to have as a message or trying to find that voice. Here, I listen to a lot of stuff about comedy, so I hear them all the time talking about, the reps and sets they have to do before they kind of find their direction and their unique voice, and I think it's a similar kind of regard in podcasting. So that's cool. I like hearing about it. I'm a huge podcast junkie, so that's why I'm, you know, poking and probing at the sentiment behind it all.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you bring up a great point with the comedians. If you study them, I mean, those are the best speakers. I mean, that's communication mastery, if you ask me. If you can really master how to stop and pause and wait for that laugh and get that laugh, it's really impressive to watch really good comedians, hone their craft. So just studying those people help with the podcast as well.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of touch a little bit more on like marketing or or branding or kind of get your sentiment since we're kind of talking about that in conjunction with the podcast. For somebody who's trying to navigate, finding their own brand or maybe to phrase this for the professionals who will be listening to this, who have to self brand and have to be cognizant of how they're portraying themselves on LinkedIn and everything you need to do to navigate being a professional in 2021. Do you have any advice for people who are kind of working on that piece?
Sure. I love acronyms. So I came up with one for a lot of things. It works MAP, MAP, right? So it's your message, your audience, and then the people that you're trying to deliver that message to. Uh, Jeff Bezos had a great quote: "Your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room." So I think understanding that, a lot of times marketing people will say, "Hey, look at me, look how great I am," but I think it's also what message you want people to carry around with them after. So from a personal standpoint, I tell people try to figure out who you are right now and is that different than what you want to be. So if you can determine what you want to be, that's your message. So you say, okay, this is my message, this is what I'm all about. And then you have to identify that audience. So, who are you giving that message to? When I was out in the field, my message to the general contractor was way different than it was to the subcontractor, and it was different to the architect, right? So your message, and then your audience, and then the people that you're talking to. So you have to research your industry and follow those experts. We talked about the comedians. That's great for delivery and things like that. But who are the people that are really, standing out in the space? And like you mentioned, LinkedIn, network online. This way you can connect with those different people. Because at the end of the day, you don't do business with companies, really. You do business with people. So your message, your audience, and your people, and that's kind of the same way when you're branding your company. You really want to get that message across and to the intended audience, and sometimes that P is a product or placement. You can swap out that P. It's not that simple.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Yeah, I think it's a good point to talk about knowing your audience. And I see the people who I see, speak most effectively or brand most effectively, understand what's value to who they're speaking to. So I think that's a huge component in being an effective communicator and just being relevant in the digital age. But I appreciate your insight on that, John.
Sure.
And so, yeah, kind of circling back on the podcast, is there anyone who you've thought of as kind of like a white whale guest you can think of? You might not, and that's okay. But I thought I'd just like to ask about it because just for my interest in, and there's so many good people out there. I found that the more you start looking for this sort of thing, the more like you just like a string that you start pulling, and then it just keeps coming. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
And I mean, I don't have any white whale guests. There's not like a hit list yet. Obviously, there's people I'd like to speak to, and no one said no yet, so that's a good thing. But I guess maybe a white whale guest would be someone that would reach out to me and maybe doesn't cancel at the last minute. Sorry again about that. But no, I mean it's really just identifying the different areas of life safety and code compliance, and just finding some interesting people to reach out to. But again, if anyone is listening and they'd like to be on the show, please reach out to me. Perhaps you and my white whale guest.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I just was my one of my white whale guests I just got to speak to recently was Joe Meyer. I think before I had started the podcast, I knew that I wanted to have Joe Meyer on the show just because he kind of does exactly what I do, but had one of the first kind of really digital personal brands in fire protection that I knew of. That wasn't just like somebody from the old guard that had, all the years of experience and all the alphabet soup behind their name to give them the clout that they needed. And so, yeah, that was one that it's kind of what I was thinking of, but that's what it was for me. But yeah, I appreciate that exposition. You're still so early on, and things will change and evolve, and as things pick up momentum, it kind of changes your perspective along the way. So that's
That's
cool.
right. We have another meeting about this tomorrow. So if you ask me this question on Thursday, I'd probably have a way different answer. So maybe I'll call you back. We'll edit it
Hey
in.
man, yeah, we'll edit it in. I don't care. Cool. Well, I always like to kind of plug people for a couple professional development topics at the end because when I speak to people who are interesting and have good ideas about what's happening, I like to get their take on what they see going on. So I wanted to start out with what kind of trends do you see in your role now? And it could be pertaining to passive fire stop, or what you're seeing in that space, or it could just be in business. I liked your Jeff Bezos quote.
Sure. I mean, so from the fire protection standpoint, we're always innovating. I mean, like I said, the fact that 100% of our business is dedicated to fire stop. We have some really smart people handling the systems and the products end of things. So I'll speak from what I know about, which is training and development, right? So I see, especially for the AEC community, more remote and or hybrid learning. We saw it from last year during the pandemic. All the continuing education and the training was 100% virtual. And we did the whole pivot thing. I hate that word, but we did it. We pivoted to virtual, and we did a lot of webinars and a lot of this continuing education, tying it back to, accreditation for these folks that were going to lose the ability to, keep their industry standard because they couldn't go to these conferences and trade shows that were shut down. So I think the lunch and learn as we know it might be dead, or it's going to evolve in some way. I also think that perhaps we're going to see more remote inspections, or at least portions of those inspections. I know from a fire stopping point of view in the 2012 IBC, there's now special inspections are required for certain buildings, and more jurisdictions are going to start to enforce this. And, we have some great digital tools called Fire Stop Locator that, allows you to, do your work and document it, so that, I think we're going to see more digital tools as well for, inspection, and also, like I said, learning for sure.
Yeah, those are all great, John. I love that about the death of the lunch and learn. I think it's hopefully it's also the death of me overeating at lunch after all the lunch and learn food is still hanging out. But it's been so interesting finding the space around e-learning kind of exploding. I mean, you look at all the associations kind of in business around fire and life safety and digitally what they're offering compared to last January. or the January of 2020, and it's just kind of crazy how much growth we've seen in that space. It seems like everybody in the game is kind of bolstering their ability to deliver online. It's like they've poured gas on this ability to bring digital content to people. I think it's so smart and something that's not going anywhere. I think we've seen a lot of efficiencies in how you can get to people and, conserve their time and conserve your time. My whole piece, I'm not gung ho on working remote. I would have told you that I was before we all got sent home, but there are some efficiencies gained with not having to go sit in a meeting or sit in a lunch and learn. And, you can get people's time from across the country, but not also have to swallow a big portion of their day. So it makes the barrier to entry lower. So I love that as a point about um, how you can, a trend of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's nothing that's going to replace the human element, but there are those efficiencies for your everyday things that I think are not going to go away after this. But that human element, that social interaction, we definitely still need it in certain settings for sure. But yes, efficiencies are definitely not going away.
And so, to follow up on that, you talked about a couple of good e-learning resources to STI, but just wanted to, plug you for if what other kind of resources would you recommend to people who want to learn more about, maybe it could be passive fire protection or even the marketing stuff. I've loved hearing about that from you, John.
Sure. I mean, again, you're going to want to look for manufacturers that specialize in what they do. You mentioned our trainings. We have our Firestop University. There are about 20 different courses that you can take, everything from the curtain wall that we talked about earlier to interior finish to just your 101 if you're an installer out there. So you don't want to just settle for someone because of name recognition, because maybe they make your favorite drill or your sticky note. But when it comes to fire stops, we've been doing it since 1990. It's all we do. There's no plan B. So we have a lot of great resources on our website for marketing as well, and especially for the design community. We have some great CAD drawings. The BIM resources are on there. We have guide specifications, other design tools as well. So it's just chock full of information. Our engineers are dynamite. I think we have over 250 combined years. I don't even know where you get that number from. I guess you add them all up, but I mean they're the best in the industry, so they are a tremendous resource. They're available Monday through Friday, 7 to 7. They have a live chat right on our website. It's all free, so they even do Saturday emergencies. They're on call for contractors and architects. So just so many different resources, and it's all on our website. So check that out again. Should I say it? www.stifirestop.com. We'll put it in the show notes, I'm sure, but a lot of resources. So don't just settle for anyone.
Gotcha. That's great. Yeah, I was just thinking of that's a great plug for the STI resources, and I'm gonna check those out too because I've been trying to buff up on passive fire protection. I was telling you in the pre-interview that I think it's so important and really where the future of where fire and life safety is going. But yeah, I realized that I didn't bug you about earlier when you were speaking about it is remote inspections and kind of that digital system that you were speaking about to log your passive fire protection systems. That sounds pretty interesting. What is that system you were speaking about?
So it's called Firestop Locator. And essentially, what it does, it allows you to um, map, you basically take your life safety drawings and you can map every single penetration or joint system, and it will allow you to document the actual UL system that you used. You can show a before and after photo. So this way, if you're in let's say a healthcare facility where you're going to have a joint commission every 3 years coming around, Rather than popping all of those different ceiling tiles to see the penetrations, this would allow you to, hand an iPad or a phone or a desktop computer, and you'd be able to see the work that was done, who it was done by. It's all barcoded, so there's little QR codes that will go back to, the application to kind of show you, so you can just quickly scan it and you can see what was done, or just look through the whole system. It's dynamite. It's an awesome tool.
That's cool. Yeah, I think that remote inspection piece, or that kind of the virtual or digital twin of facilities, is a big thing in the industry, and trying to bake in more information about a facility into the digital model, or make the documentation more robust, is a wonderful thing. So that's cool. I like hearing about that. Yeah. So I just wanted to, end with what piece of advice would you have for somebody who, sees John and says, "Man, how do I win in the fire and life safety industry?"
Well, I would say to become a specialist. I oftentimes I'll use the analogy: would you rather be a general practitioner or would you rather be a brain surgeon? I mean, we know who makes more money, right? And they probably work less of the time. But no, but being a specialist within the industry, people will seek you out. Then, if you can be that um, fire stopping specialist within your company, if you're a contractor, or if you're a distributor or someone who sells our products, if you can be that resource, then people will seek you out. They'll come to know you, like you, and trust you, and that means that they're going to buy whatever it is that you're selling, because they know that you have their best interest in heart, and you're a student of the game, and you're going to learn so that they don't have to learn, the hard way, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great. I love that note because I feel like fire protection and fire and life safety is all specialists. And then if you get even more niche within the industry, like, you can really kind of see this amplifier effect for your career. I mean, the opportunity within the fire and life safety industry is just immense. And I've found that anytime you can find a extra sticky place, or something that's even more difficult than the baseline of what we're doing, you found a place where you can add even more value, and there's even more, compensation available. So I think that's a great point. I love that.
And always pick up the phone. I mean, when I was new to the industry, if I didn't know the answer, I didn't send you the voicemail. I picked up the phone and I told you I was going to find out. So people would rather hear that you're working on it than silence. So that would be my other piece of advice to someone new to the industry.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it can be difficult sometimes. We're working on bringing in interns for the summer, and just happen to be like, all right, you need to check in with these people, because they might not have that muscle to reach out when they're flailing and not have it under control. So I think that's a great point, to not be afraid. To anybody who's a professional, realizes that you're not going to know everything, or you might have to circle back and get answers, or you might need to get some help. And so I think that's a great piece of advice, and a learned skill. So that's great.
For sure. And
But
join Toastmasters. It's if you don't know what Toastmasters is, it's a public speaking group. People of all ages and backgrounds come together to practice their public speaking skills and the language, leadership, listening. It's a great organization, so I highly recommend it. If you want to communicate better, get your message across, it's definitely the way to go.
that's awesome. Yeah, that's a good recommendation. I've heard a couple people refer to Toastmasters, so that's interesting. But anyways, John, anything I didn't ask about that you wanted to talk about, or any other last thoughts as we're getting close to the end of the podcast?
Now, Gus, I think we hit it all. I do appreciate you having me on the show and giving me a platform for the burn. So check out that podcast. Check out our website for all those great resources. And again, like I said, just appreciate the time.
No, thank you, John. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, I'll drop a bunch of links in the show notes, and yeah, thank you. Alrighty. Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.